when we were doing our introduction, practicing different ones, I asked you guys to go back to elementary school and remember the torture and agony of poring over your history books, trying to remember the dates and what led to what, which event was this, and why did that happen again? And then turning to your teacher with frustration saying, why do I need to know this? Why do I need to know who won such and such war? Why do I need to know who wrote the Magna Carta? Why is this important? Personally, I've always loved history. I have a fascination with mostly the people who lived back then. The fact that they were the future of that time, that they had the same dreams, mentalities for the future that we do today. It may seem kind of redundant to say they were the future back in that time, but if you really think about it, it's kind of an interesting concept. We kind of think of them as in history. They had old technology, they had old clothes, they had old schooling, they had old mentalities. It was old, it's history. But they were the ones with dreams for technology today. They were the ones wondering, what is my world going to be like in 10 years? What is it going to be like when I'm 30? You know how we think, okay, oh, this new technology is coming out, in 2 years. They were thinking the same thing. They were the people of today, only back then. So I've always been really fascinated with history, and mostly the little events, the tiny pieces, like who invented the marshmallow, or why were potato chips made. The little pieces that we kind of don't really think about, but those tend to be my favorite. So, and I never really thought of my interest in history as history being important. It was something that I enjoyed, but I didn't really think of why it could be important. So I knew on the intellectual level that it was. Of course, you hear in school, it's important that you learn this, but I wasn't really sure why. And last semester, some of you were there, I was in education class, and I decided to write my paper on academics and true education, which includes the study of history. So I was really interested. I was thinking, I'm going to learn why the things that I enjoy are important. And I discovered various reasons why it is important that we study history, as individuals, as a society, but most importantly, as Christians. So the picture that I had you guys imagine back in 5th grade is sort of the stereotype that we have of history. It's, however, only really a small component. If you think about history as a whole, memorizing the dates, memorizing, what happened on such and such a date, that's just a small part of it. It's really much more than that. It's the events leading up to the events, the choices that were made by individuals, and the people who struggled with those choices at that time that make history important. If you think about how we struggle with, where am I going to go to school, what am I going to do, people back then didn't just decide, okay, I'm going to sign the Declaration of Independence, and that was it. It was a struggle that went on in their mind, a result of their character, a result of their choices, something that was happening the same way we experience it. So if we start with my favorite part of history, which is the little pieces like I was telling you, for example, why are most bathrooms white? It's kind of, okay, why does that really matter? I have this book that covers history of toilets, toasters, typewriters, pencils, random things like that, which, like I said, I really enjoy. Anyways, but it was saying that in a certain time period, that when, I guess, bathrooms were becoming really popular, the public mentality of what was clean was white. White was the color of cleanliness. And so, of course, the companies making sinks, making toilets, making showers, that we want to present this as sort of like the house, hospital type of thing. And we want it to look clean because that's what the public has. So, of course, now today we have more of a scientific knowledge. Germs are going to be germs no matter where they are, no matter what color. It can look dirty and it still be clean. It can look clean and still be dirty. But we still have the effects of the mentality of somebody back then. Another example is, why does one type of toaster have a certain design on the side? It's just a little design. But the reason it was made there is because it would distract the viewer from looking at the scratches and nicks on the side of the metal toaster and just go, oh, look, nice design. But that was made for a specific reason. And those can seem like little things that why it's not really affecting our lives today. But it really gives us an example of how what was back then, we're still living the effects today. For example, another really small detail that I'm sure it doesn't affect too many of us. How many of you know how potato chips were invented, or how the story goes? So a few of you, correct? If it's the same one I know, in Saratoga, New York, I think it was New York, there was this gentleman who wanted French fries. And he asked for French fries. The chef sent out French fries. And he said, they are way too thick. I want thinner ones. So he sent them back. They sent out more French fries that were a little bit thinner. And he said, nope, that's it. Send them back. I want them thin. And so the chef, in frustration, he cut potatoes as thin as he could, fried them up, sent them out to the customer. And to his shock and surprise, the customer loved them. Therefore goes the story of potato chips. Which, a potato chip is a potato chip. But if you think about it, it's a result of two people's characters. One person who was just too annoyed, was really picky, wanted something and said, I want it this way. Do it again. And another person who said, okay, forget this. I'm frustrated. I have other things to do. I just want to get this done. Forget him. I'm going to just annoy him. It's a result of two people's characters. A result that we have today. I mean, how many potato chips does America consume a year? So, on a grand scale of the effects that we have today, if you think about the fight for civil rights, that was a big thing. 100 years ago, people did not have the same equal rights. And while we may not have the same mentality today, obviously today we have the mentality, everyone's created equal, we all have the same rights. We're still actually dealing with the effects of that. We attempt to deal with the inequality of yesterday with things like affirmative action, an attempt to make today equal, to make up for yesterday's injustice. So, when I was doing my paper that I told you guys about, I really wanted to know what Spirit of Prophecy said about history. Why was it important? More specifically, general history. Obviously, I knew biblical history was important. But I wanted to know about general history because I really enjoyed that as well. And so I began reading kind of with trepidation because I didn't really want to know if the kind of history I liked wasn't important or not. I kind of tend to do that. And so, but what I did find was actually very encouraging. And really interesting to realize how important it actually was. In education, on page, in A Call to Stand Apart, Ellen G. White writes that let the pupils study the lives of such men, and the Apostle Paul and Martin Luther as Moffat and Livingstone and Carey, and the present daily unfolding history of missionary effort, instead of burdening their memories with an array of names and theories that have no bearing upon their lives, and to which, once outside the classroom, they rarely give a thought. Let them study all lands in the light of missionary effort and become acquainted with the peoples and their needs. So, like all components of true education, it must serve the purpose of equipping us for better service. In the book Education, she writes, in education, there is a perfect summary of how and why history should be studied. As too often taught, history is little more than a record of the rise and fall of kings, the intrigues of courts, the victories and defeats of armies, a story of ambition and greed, of deception, cruelty, and bloodshed. Thus taught, its results cannot but be detrimental. The heart-sickening reiteration of crimes and atrocities, the enormities, the cruelties portrayed plant seeds that in many lives bring forth fruit in a harvest of evil. It's kind of a long quote, but it really shows a good point. Far better is it to learn, in the light of God's word, the causes that govern the rise and fall of kingdoms. Let the youth study these records and see how the true prosperity of nations has been bound up with an acceptance of the divine principles. Let him study the history of the great reformatory movements and see how often these principles, though despised and hated, their advocates brought to the dungeon and the scaffold, have through these very sacrifices triumphed. Such study will give broad, comprehensive views of life. It will help the youth to understand something of its relations and dependencies, how wonderfully we are bound together in the great brotherhood of society and nations, and to how great an extent the oppression or degradation of one member means to lose all. The importance of history in nations and societies. On another part of education, she writes, to understand these things,